thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
If you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Sure. My name is Katie. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm a former athlete. I was a synchronized swimmer and swam for the Ohio State University. And now I work as a dietitian in private practice, helping former athletes overcome body image issues, find nourishing foods, and really just learn how to fuel themselves for life after sport.
And what brought you to Vegas?
Vegas is home. So I'm originally from the Detroit area, but my family moved out here when I was 10. And then after college and my education, I decided to come back to Vegas.
Didn't decide to go back to Detroit?
No, I went back for my internship, but that was it. I was back in Vegas after that.
And what made you want to be a dietitian?
Ooh, so many things. I always say the two biggest impacts were my brother is a cancer survivor. And so I saw the importance nutrition played in his recovery, and that kind of lended me towards the medical side of dietetics. But then my time as an athlete, I personally struggled with food and body image and jumped on all sorts of diets. And I really just wanted to learn what do we actually need to do to fuel our bodies best. So I decided to study it and become a dietitian.
And so your history as a athlete, tell us about synchronized swimming. How'd you get into that? That's a unique sport.
It is such a unique sport, and it's not very big in the United States. It's a lot bigger over in Europe and Asia. But I was a speed swimmer first, so I did speed swimming from the age of 3 until 10. I saw synchro on TV, and I was really fascinated by it. I always loved dance and gymnastics, and I thought putting those together with my love of swimming would be awesome. So my mom actually saw an ad in the newspaper for a local synchro team when we first moved out to Vegas. I went to their open tryout, and then 11 years later, I was retiring from the sport.
So what things surprise people about synchronized swimming? Because I'm sure like in conversation when you meet people, you're like, oh, yes, I used to do that. What does it entail? What kind of skills do you need to have?
It's such an interesting sport because it combines so many different facets of athleticism. You have to have endurance, you have to have breath control, you have to have body control, strength, finesse, agility. I think the two things that are most surprising that have nothing to do with the actual athleticism of the sport is we put gelatin in our hair, so how our hair actually stays in our buns. We use the brand specifically is Knox. So you use Knox gelatin, the unflavored kind, and it creates this hard shell around your hair so you can get in the water and it just kind of rolls right off. And the second thing is we can hear the music underwater. So there are underwater speakers that allow us to hear the music when we go up and down. So I think those are the two most surprising things that people are interested to hear when they're talking about synchronized swimming.
Did you ever try the flavored Jell-O and then try to put it in your hair?
I did not, because usually they're colored, but that would probably be pretty fun and interesting. Maybe not on I have very dark brown hair, but maybe on someone who's blonde, you could see the color a little bit more.
And I feel like, too, that's one of those sports that you're watching it and it looks easy, but it's probably really difficult because of all those things you just mentioned.
Yes, I always compared it to, it's like usually our routines are about 4 minutes long, so it's trying to run like a 4-minute mile while holding your breath, intermittently being able to breathe while running a couple miles. And the most interesting piece about it is our breath control. So you have to time not only your body's movements, but you also have to time when you breathe. So we calculate it down to the stroke under the water, to the movement coming up, to be able to maximize your breath during the routine. So everything is very choreographed.
Even the breathing, that's interesting.
Even the breathing. So
is that a trial and error process, or is there like some tried and true methods of, that when you do this is the best time to take a breath?
There are some tried and true methods. There's also just some trial and error, kind of gauging when the best breath is. The worst thing is when you've practiced when to breathe and then someone splashes differently or something happens and you inhale water before you go under. It's like, oh no, here we go without any breath. But for the most part, it's so choreographed and so practiced. We're pretty good at gauging when to breathe.
And do you do any kind of breath work or any kind of practice specifically to that skill? Like not like in addition to that, obviously the other training that you're doing, but do you ever focus on that individually?
Yeah, we did a lot of hypoxic training. So we would do butterfly, flip turn into underwaters, trying to do 50-meter underwaters, lots of practice doing just swimming and endurance swimming underwater. And then we would also have kind of like time trials with different skills and seeing how long we could hold positions like verticals underwater to build up our lung capacity, but also our muscle capacity without the oxygen to kind of further our breath control.
And then other than the breathing work, what else would you do as far as conditioning goes?
Oh, we
Or
did
strength conditioning?
everything. We would do speed swimming workouts. We would do land training. We would do dancing in order to kind of get that performance aspect down. So it's really a combination of a lot of things. We even did running. You think swimmers don't run, but we did a lot of running in our training and a lot of lifting as well.
So a pretty good amount of training outside the pool as well.
Yes, I would say in college we had 3 days worth of land training, so an hour to an hour and a half of land training for 3 days during the week. And then in addition to our water practices, we would do land warm-ups, stretching, conditioning. So it was a pretty significant amount of land training.
For the dancing that you did, was it both land and in the water like equally, or is it more like it's more important to practice water because you have the different dynamics in the water, right? When you're having to turn and like a pointed toe, like up in without that, and so you can't really like think about like your dancing. Does it translate into land versus pool?
Yeah, so I would say the body control from doing it on land really transitioned into the water. It is different, obviously, because now you don't have gravity and you're floating and having to learn how to hold your body when water is moving around you. But it did translate, and then we would move that into the water and practice it in the water as well. So majority of our training was done in the water, but we used some of those complementary trainings to really just improve our abilities.
Would you say how much of your breath work has translated into the skills maybe that you do now in terms of fitness or just overall learning how to breathe?
Oh, it translated so much. I am a group fitness instructor, and I would say one of the biggest things is I don't struggle nearly as much to talk and work out because my breath control was really built up from being a synchronized swimmer, and I feel like I have a better ability to clearly speak when I'm out of breath because of that breath control. The other thing is my resting heart rate. It always surprises me whenever I get it tested, or I was hospitalized for something minor not too long ago. The alarm kept going off because my heart rate kept dropping so low. So I feel like a lot of swimmers can relate to that, but it has really allowed me to be able to speak when maybe I'm feeling a little bit more short of breath and sound a little bit more in control.
And where do you teach the group fitness classes at?
I teach it at True Fusion here in Las Vegas, True Fusion Summerlin.
And what kind of classes?
I teach bar and then I sub boxing. So I have a couple bar classes on the schedule, and then I sub their boxing classes every once in a while.
How much of your synchronized swimming skills do you translate into the bar class?
Oh, so much. I think that's why it's my favorite one. Always telling people, point your toes, lengthen your legs, and that's definitely my synchro coming out in class.
You're going to like mixed up and give them like a swimming cue instead?
Sometimes I will say when we're like rolling up, I'll say, and your head and shoulders are the last to surface. And I'm like, we're not surfacing. We're already on land. But yeah, that definitely comes out every once in a while.
So now when you go into a pool, just, if you're swimming in the lake or something, like how often would you say you practice some of the old skills you might have done versus, sometimes when you're like, you go back to nostalgia and you're like, oh yeah, I used to do this. Like, what are the kind of things that you go to see if you can still do?
It's so funny. I burned out really hard. And so when I retired, I didn't even want to touch a pool. Otherwise, I would just be like floating on a raft, and that was the extent of my water time. But now I'm getting more comfortable and ready to kind of try it again. So I just like to kind of freestyle it, do some choreography that just kind of comes to mind, and I'll try some skills. I like to try my spin, see if I can still spin. I'm definitely more dizzy than I used to be. I've lost that a little bit. But just seeing what I can and can't do in the water, it's nice to just move through it.
So when you first started to learn how to spin, you would get dizzy that's a normal thing?
Oh yeah. And it's quick. It's crazy how quick you lose that. But some of the other things I'm able to hold on to, but I used to be able to tuck out of a spin, come up and keep doing a routine. Now I tuck out of a spin, I come up and I'm like, whoa, which way, where am I facing? So I lost that pretty fast.
It's one thing you don't really think about is being able to control that, and as far as your balance and everything while you're moving underwater.
Yeah.
Especially when you're coming out of water, yeah.
Yeah, coming from underwater to above water, you really have to be aware of where the surface is. When you come up, gaining your awareness of your location pretty quickly. And it's kind of crazy. I didn't realize how much that was learned until I've been retired for almost 6 years now.
So with because sometimes like I position in being able to focally look at something can help with, especially with dancers, right? Dancers kind of find their thing against the wall and they do their spins. What is that for synchronized swimmers?
Yeah, so we don't spot walls like dancing does, because that's gonna throw off our balance. But we definitely are spotting where we're going. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
So sorry about that.
That's right.
Pause for a second.
I was trying to control it so badly. Thank you.
You want to clap again? Or?
Yeah, we'll do that. That's
Okay.
fine.
I do apologize.
No worries.
problem.
That has not happened in a very long time.
You doing okay?
Yeah, you know when you just get like a tickle?
Yeah, yeah. Happened to me yesterday after breakfast.
Yeah.
It usually happens to me at night. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, but okay.
All set?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that how you can sit? You good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I always am like in the way of.
All right. So spinning underwater is a little bit differently as far as you don't look for the focal point like a traditional dancer would.
Right. We don't spot walls like dancers do. We keep our head in alignment with our spine so that way it doesn't throw off our stability underwater. So we keep everything really tight. So we have to count our walls. It's interesting because we kind of count our walls based on the number of sculls you do. So the sculling is what moves you around. So you might count 1, 2, 3, 4, and that will determine how many walls you've hit. So it has to be very precise. But dancing, they kind of look ahead to spot the wall. We're not doing that. We're basically gauging it as we're going to make sure we're hitting the right number of walls.
That's really interesting.
It is. It's very different.
Are there any swimmers that when they get in the pool to start practicing that they realize that they have some kind of like vestibular ocular thing going on and they have to do additional training?
Yeah, it does happen where they're not able to count their walls or catch their walls. And so then they have to do things either on land or just practicing, in the water above water to be able to kind of catch and see. Because when you're underwater, you really aren't able to look at where you're at. And when we do our competitions, we don't wear goggles. So you really are dependent on feeling your body and making sure you're aware enough to know how many spins you've had. So it does happen. And I remember we had a teammate who ended up with vertigo. And so she really lost her ability to spin and she had to take some time out of the water before she kind of regained that ability to catch her walls underwater.
I also think you probably would have to have good eyesight to do that if you don't wear any corrective lenses.
So it's funny because I actually wear contacts, and we do something called setting your contacts. So you go underwater. I wear dailies for this exact reason.
Is this gelatin again?
It's very similar. I was going to say, I have 2 other fun facts that might be interesting to people. But we go underwater before we do our competitions, and you open your eyes. When you open your eyes underwater, you'll feel your contacts kind of suction to your eyes. And it doesn't always stay. Sometimes you'll lose a contact while you're competing, which is why we wear dailies, because you don't want to lose your monthly contacts. But it allows them to suction, and then you're able to keep your contacts while you're swimming. Otherwise, you are blind, and there's been times where I've lost both contacts, and I have no idea where I'm at. I'm just kind of hoping that I'm doing everything correctly. But yeah, that's one of the tricks that we do with our contacts if you do have to wear corrective lenses.
That's interesting because there's a story about Michael Phelps and how his goggle fills up on one and then he gets the other one, but he just had such a practice of his kinesthetic awareness that he was like counting the stroke and he was still, I think that was his record time. I forget what story it was particularly, but his goggles filled up. And I would imagine that it'd be very challenging to see and counting your strokes and how long you've practiced and knowing how far you are to do your turns. Like those are all big factors. So I can imagine when you lose your contacts that you just, I hope I practiced this enough. If this is that you rely on your team. How much can you feel when you're underwater as you're because you're doing this in a really close vicinity of your team, right?
Yep. Yeah. We have several different events. So the team event is usually 8 people swimming at one time. And so we really do rely on making sure that our teammates are in the correct position for patterns, and you're looking to gauge, for me, it was more like just seeing blobs underwater, but looking for the blob, quite, near me. So that way I was making sure I was in the right pattern. But another thing with feeling, and this is the second fun fact. When we compete, we usually don't, how speed swimmers will shave everything so that way they're able to move faster. We usually don't shave our legs in particular, so that way we can feel the levels a little bit better. Because when you do shave, you lose that ability to feel the water and what level you're at. So fun fact, synchronized swimmers are going to be not doing that, so that way they can gauge where they're at. You really do lose the ability. The next time you go in the pool, if you've shaved, feel the water, and you can't really gauge where you're at. So
I'm going to shave like one leg and then out the other and see which one tells me gets better input.
I love that experiment.
Yeah, that's really good.
Are there male teams synchronized swimming?
So there's becoming more males, mostly in the mixed duet category. So we have solos, duets, trios, and teams. On the world stage, it's right now just solo, duet, and team, and mixed duet was the newest event added. So men are not usually competing in the teams at the Olympic level, and mixed duets are not in the Olympic level yet, but at Worlds, there is mixed duet. So we're seeing more men in the sport, which is really exciting.
And that's more important too for them. Like they can feel the
yes,
legs. Like they have the advantage,
Yep.
Exactly.
It's like they got their whiskers,
It's true. That's true.
What else do you do to spend your time in Vegas? Since you've been here for quite a while, what you do is probably a lot different than someone that just moved here.
Yeah, that's very true. I do love everything that Vegas has to offer. So I love going to Red Rock Canyon. I live pretty close to Red Rock, which is really nice. Occasionally I'll go down to the Strip, but it's very rare that you'll find me on the Strip. I live up in like the Summerlin area, and so I love walking all of the parks that they have, teaching fitness classes. I would say I live a pretty normal life despite living in the Las Vegas city limits. So Red Rock is probably my favorite place to take weekend hikes, though.
And especially being a dietitian, any favorite local restaurants you like going to?
Oh, such a good question. I love Sinatra's. We went there we go there for special dinners. It's actually on the Strip. One of the reasons I'll go to the Strip at the Wynn. I do love True Food Kitchen as well. True Food Kitchen in downtown Summerlin is a favorite of mine. Ooh, what are some of my other favorite restaurants here? Those are the two that are jumping off at me right now. There's a Mexican restaurant, and of course I'm not going to remember the name of it, but there's a Mexican restaurant down on the Strip as well that's really good. I'll think about it. I'll let you guys know.
Well, it's good because I feel like we don't know a lot of Strip restaurants. It's good to have them if people want to come in town and be like, oh, I'll meet you at this restaurant because I know it's good.
Yes, it is. And you can't really go wrong in Vegas. There's so many good food places to eat. Trying them out is also another fun thing I like to do, going to new restaurants and seeing what new food items they have on the menu.
What got you into teaching bar classes and boxing?
So post-sport, when I retired, I really struggled and kind of fumbled around with what I wanted my exercise routine to look like. I tried all of the downloadable workout routines that, the Fitspo people posted, and tried running on my own, doing things like that, but nothing was really enjoyable anymore. And so one day I tried a group fitness class at True Fusion. I'd been seeing ads for it and wanted to try it, and I went and took a bar class, and I fell in love with it. And so I was a student there before I was an instructor, and then I just tried all of their classes. I got into yoga and Pilates and kettlebells, and just really liked the group fitness environment. It reminded me of the team environment, and decided I wanted to teach it. And so then ended up doing the training and teaching.
So how do you balance that with being a dietitian?
Like time-wise or just, yeah.
Time schedule-wise?
Time schedule-wise. I teach mostly in the evenings or on the weekends. The nice thing is I feel like I'm getting my workout in too when I'm teaching, and so it's kind of twofold. But time blocking and also just setting boundaries has been really important with being a dietitian in the hospital, running my private practice, and then teaching group fitness classes. Setting those boundaries has been really important to make sure I have time to rest and recover, and then also getting to be able to do all the things that are on my schedule.
What are some things that you find whether your clients or people that struggle with after retiring from sport, besides like trying to finding, I guess, new ways to have a new identity? You know, what are some things that you've noticed or things that you help people with in that regard?
Yeah, I always say there are three kind of identities, if you will, that I've noticed as a theme that retired athletes really struggle with. And they're the all or nothing mentality, burn to earn, and never good enough. So I see a lot of people jumping through the all or nothing. It's very black and white. And especially with nutrition and even fitness, living in the gray is really important because there's no one right way for people and it's very nuanced. And so getting away from that black and white all or nothing mentality can provide a lot more enjoyment and a lot less guilt and frustration. That burn to earn mentality, you have to work out in order to earn food, is just perpetuates through the sport culture, and recognizing that food plays more than just the fuel role. It can be connection and love and community, and it's okay to eat outside of needing to just fuel for performance. And then that never good enough. I think a lot of athletes are constantly striving to be better, which is great until it becomes more hindering than helpful. And that can sometimes happen when we retire, where we're constantly trying to improve, that we're never satisfied and we're never finding joy or happiness. And so pausing and reflecting and realizing what you're doing is enough. You are enough. You don't have to continue to reach for, achievement. It's great, but you can also find contentment and joy where you're at right now. I'd say those are the three top things I find athletes and former athletes really struggling with.
I'm from the front end of that. So if someone knows that they're, maybe not going to do something on a higher level after, say, they're in season and they're like, oh, this is my last thing. What would you say is maybe something that one should think about, or just how to prep themselves for that retirement?
Such a good question. So I'm a really big fan of journaling, and I did not get into journaling until I really retired. And I think being able to have a space to process some of those thoughts and emotions is really helpful. So starting to think about, what do you want your life to look like post-sport? What are things that are important to you outside of sport? Seeing if you can diversify your inner circle with people who aren't just connected to your sport, because who you're seeing, the feed that you're scrolling through, your connections, having those people be diverse and have different connections outside of just the sport you're in can really help usher you into life after sport. When we're so inundated with sport culture, stepping away from it can be really shocking. So if you do that gradually and you start to insert yourself into areas that are not connected to sport before you retire, it can be really helpful to ease that transition.
We were talking earlier about retirement and what that means. I want to talk a little bit. What does retirement mean, and what does that mean in different levels of athletics or sports?
Yeah, I feel like retirement. We were talking that you can retire really at any level. I think the further up in the level of play that you're at, whether you're high school, college, the higher up you go, the harder it is to retire. And retirement for me really just means like no longer formally competing and kind of stepping away. Because I'll say once an athlete, you're always an athlete. That identity will always be with you, but it might just shift a little bit. But when it is such a big part of your life for so long, that can create more challenges when you retire, because we become so used to living life a certain way, eating, drinking, sleeping, training. It just is so regimented when we're an athlete. So the longer you're in that regimented mentality, when you go to step away from it, it can feel a lot harder, like the rug is pulled out from under you. Mm-hmm. And so I think, being prepared for that and also giving yourself the space to kind of mourn and grieve. This might be the biggest piece of advice, is recognize that you are going to go through a period of maybe grief when you retire, and that it's okay to walk through that period to get to the side where you're able to enjoy life after sport a little bit more.
So what's something that you see within your practice that you wish more people knew?
Keto is not the answer. I think that might be the biggest thing, mostly because it was created for kids with epilepsy, which is something that not a lot of people realize. And actually staying in ketosis is really challenging. And so making sure that if you do decide to go into the to follow a keto diet for your lifestyle, which I'm here for, food autonomy, you get to make those decisions. But just make sure that you're really tracking with a medical team, because it can have some negative consequences if it's not done correctly. But that it is okay to enjoy carbs. I think carbs are still really demonized, especially in the maybe weight loss world. If you're trying to lose weight, cutting carbs is not going to be the sustainable answer. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I see people doing, where they get frustrated because they lose weight, gain weight, but they have to find that sustainability.
And what are some other things too that people that you would commonly see? Because I know that a lot of people, it seems like they want to say, I'm doing this diet or this program, but they don't really have any reasoning why. Or you ask them, well, why are you doing that? And they're like, oh, well, I saw this person do it. So it's interesting that people have a lot of like imitation type things, is like that's why they pick that behavior, not necessarily like, oh, I really researched this and it seemed to fit me individually. You don't really hear that answer all that often. A lot of times it's like, oh, well, this person did it, I want to be more like them.
Yes, exactly. And you bring up a really good point, because dieting, or like you said, oh, I'm doing this because this person, it is actually a form of connection and community, right? Like sometimes people are joining different types of diets or fads because they're looking for that connection with other people. It almost creates like a kinship, like, oh, well, we do X, Y, and Z. And so then you have that kind of sense of teammate or camaraderie together. And so how you identify your nutrition or your food intake can also be an identity itself. And so kind of getting curious with yourself and asking, why am I doing this? The two questions I always ask my clients and people who are trying to figure out, well, what is the best way to eat for me? One, could you eat this way for the rest of your life? That is the first question. And two, would you want to? And if the answer is no to either of those, then it's not going to be sustainable for you, and we need to find something else.
I guess it's also a hard question sometimes too, is people are like, oh, I'll suck it up for whatever time. And they're like, okay, yeah, I think I can. Like, it's a thing.
It's like, oh, drive this car, the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
About 8 weeks.
Right. Yes. We think, oh, if I just do this for, X amount of time, or, a 3-day cleanse, or, a 30-day whatever, then I'll be good. But our bodies don't work that way. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing is there's a misunderstanding with human physiology and how your body actually functions. If you do something for 30 days and then you go back to doing what you were doing before, that 30 days really didn't do much. It might have given you, some weight loss, or maybe some water loss, or whatever it might be. But then your body's going to readapt to what you were doing beforehand. And so that's why it's so important to create something that is sustainable. And you can say, I could do this every single day, and I could do this no matter what life events throw me. Because otherwise your body is going to just kind of go through this up and down. And research has shown that weight cycling is more detrimental than weight maintenance. And so if you're constantly losing and regaining those same 20 pounds, it does have negative impacts on your health.
Such as what?
Cardiovascular health. And so we're noticing that there's a lot higher risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, those chronic illnesses. People who weight cycle have a higher risk of developing those compared to people, even, absent of BMI or where they're at. Weight maintenance, your body likes to stay in that homeostatic place. And so if you can really find a range that just works for you and you kind of hang out there, that is more beneficial for your health than constantly cycling those same 20 pounds.
So when somebody is changing their training, so whether that's like they're going to change to bodybuilding, or they're wanting to increase their training capacity and they're training for a competition, how does that change their nutrition in terms of fueling? That might not change their specific body weight, but that might require a few more calories for that training. So how does that change from a nutrition standpoint?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is it's going to be very gradual. We don't ever want to do anything too drastic, because then the body has to adapt very quickly. So if someone is trying to change body composition or increase their training load, we're going to gradually either increase calories, increase protein, adjust macronutrient percentages based on what their goal is, where they're starting, and what the timeline is. But the biggest thing is really making sure that it's small, sustainable changes over time. And I think that's probably one of the biggest missteps that I see people do is they do these drastic changes and then their body's confused. It's not sustainable. They get frustrated. So making sure that you're slowly making those changes from where you're starting to where your goal is.
From a macronutrient standpoint, let's talk about that because I know there's a lot of views on what's the ideal macros. Are you hitting your macros? You know, all those things. Can you tell us your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on a person's activity level. It's going to depend on their genetics and their current body composition. But just standard, we usually say, and this is actually the number that surprises people the most, 50% of your daily intake should be carbs, 30% should be fat, and then 20% should be protein. That's just, again, just very standard. It's going to change based on training, level of physical activity, goals, things like that. But that's kind of the rough estimation. And then from a macronutrient standpoint, that could change based on, and I always think this is super fascinating, but it could change specifically for females based on the time of the month. So, when we're further away from our cycle, we're doing like fatty acid oxidation more so than carbohydrate as fuel. But then when we're closer to our cycle leading up to it and during the week of, we are utilizing carbohydrates more for fuel. So your macronutrient intake is going to really vary based on a ton of different factors, which is why it's so important to get an individualized assessment to make sure that you're meeting your needs.
So within each of our own individual professions, we hear a lot of things that are very generalized questions, but often the answer is more nuanced. So what would be your soapbox moment for as far as like a standard baseline question that you would get asked?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. The biggest thing is when people ask me, well, what do I eat? And I would say, well,
food.
Yeah, exactly. Food. I can't tell you just by, looking at you. I need to do a deeper understanding of where you're at, your history. But then the other thing that really kind of is like nails on a chalkboard for me as a dietitian is when people say, oh, I can't eat that because I'm being good, or I'm so bad today, so I might as well just eat X, Y, and Z. It's that attachment of morality to food. And based on your food choices, you're either a good person today or a bad person today. That is one of the quickest ways to derail your success and kind of spiral you away from your goals, because as soon as you attach your morality as a person to your food choices, you are constantly going to feel guilt and shame and anxiety when you're making food choices, and then that just makes it 10 times harder to nourish your body properly. So I would really love to kind of get rid of that language around food, and you're not being good or bad based on the food choices you make.
It's the other things you do through the rest of the day that makes you good or bad.
Yes, exactly.
Like, were you kind to small animals today? Then good. Then you're a good person.
Exactly.
I got it. Makes total sense, Coach.
I think you use the term choice because there's a lot of food choices, right? Mm-hmm. So I forget there's a statistic about how many food choices there are, right? You go to the grocery store and there's thousands of things that you can look through and really analyze. And that can also lead to sometimes what people call decision fatigue.
Yes.
So what are ways that you typically recommend to people? Like, how can people reduce that decision fatigue? Because sometimes it's just like, you can get dressed. There's like 7 different things in your closet you can choose. Yep. So same thing with food. How are things that you can look at something and what are ways that you like to look at those things?
Such a good question. And this is actually a really common struggle that a lot of clients have is they do have that decision fatigue around food because there are like 14 different types of popcorn and like 13 different pasta sauces and what do I grab? And so I do recommend that when you're trying to make a decision, 1, always pick the food that actually tastes good, that you actually like. That's super important. 2, something that fits within your budget because financial constraints around food is a really big thing. But then 3, looking at, is this something that when I'm building meals, I just look at kind of like, speaking of macro, kind of a play on words, but like the macro, the global things. Do I have a carb? Do I have a fat? Do I have a protein? And if I can say yes to those things, we're good. The other thing is, when we're making food choices and we want to make sure that we're having variety in our week, buying ingredients that can be used versatile in a bunch of different ways. So let's say we buy spinach, mozzarella, chicken, and tomato sauce. Okay, well now I can just have a bunch of different carbohydrate choices. I could make a spinach, mozzarella, chicken quesadilla and dip it in the marinara sauce. I could do pasta with those same ingredients. I could do an egg scramble with spinach and mozzarella. And so just utilizing the ingredients that you have in a couple different versatile ways, so that way you don't have to decide on 100 different ingredients for the week. You can decide on 10 ingredients for the week and still be able to make different meals. But I also say, marketing madness is a really big thing with nutrition, and people try and, or companies and brands will try and get your attention based on keywords. We can outsmart those, and don't let flashy things like non-GMO or like reduced guilt or things like that impact your food decision. Just looking at it from, is this going to meet my carb, fat, or protein needs for the day? Do I enjoy it? And then moving from there.
Speaking of macronutrients, what about micronutrients? I know that from a very nuanced standpoint, because you're a dietitian, that you have a lot of thoughts of it. I know it's a general question, but like, can you give us some thoughts about how to incorporate micronutrients? Because sometimes people just eat the same thing every day, which is fine, right? But
yeah,
go on and tell us more about it.
No, that's such a great point. I always say like variety is really key. But speaking of that decision fatigue, something that I do is I tend to eat very similar breakfasts and lunches to keep my decisions down there. But then I always have variety in my dinners. So that's one way. But from a micronutrient standpoint, looking at, of course, fruits and vegetables, that's going to be the default, right? Because we're going to get the bulk of our fruits and our micronutrients from fruits and vegetables, but also asking yourself, can I change up the type of bread that I buy? Because our wheat supply is fortified with B vitamins and folic acid. And so if you can change up the type of bread that you're buying, you're going to get different amounts based on which product you're buying. Can I change the type of yogurt that I'm buying? Can I shift around the crackers or the pasta? When we have variety, we're going to get a variety of different micronutrients. And the other thing is we're also going to fuel our gut microbiome a little bit different, which could be a whole other podcast episode.
Oh, yeah.
But variety is really the key for diversifying your micronutrient intake, diversifying your gut microbiome, keeping you a little, not bored with your food choices, and just helping to optimize your overall health. I would say the key micronutrients to focus on that the general population does not hit enough of: vitamin D, of course, calcium from food sources. So a lot of people are staying away from dairy products, and that is totally fine, but seeing if you can increase your calcium intake through things like broccoli. Broccoli is actually really high in calcium. So vitamin D, calcium, and then iron too, specifically iron intake. Nothing wrong with red meat as long as you are eating it moderately and picking a cut that is going to be lower in fat. It's really the saturated fat that gets a bad rep in meat, but that iron is so quality and it's going to be absorbed better. Went on a little science tangent there, but
That's good. So tell us more about your company.
Yeah, so my business name is Spada Strong Nutrition LLC. It's a nutrition coaching company. I do mostly virtual work, and it was really born out of seeing a need with my teammates and my own self struggling with food, body image, exercise when I retired and when they retired. And so the bulk of my work is helping my clients heal their relationship with food, work through body image struggles, and find a sustainable workout routine for them. I offer one-to-one. I do mostly one-to-one client work, some group coaching, and then most recently I just launched a self-paced course. And so you can walk through my entire framework of my program at your own pace through this course. But I really just want people to enjoy eating and not be so stressed about their nutrition.
And what's your ideal client?
Ooh, my ideal client. I love that question. I actually journaled on my ideal client. If I were to get very specific, it would be the former college athlete, usually coming from an aesthetic sport, gymnastics, ice skating, dance, swimming, that sort of a thing, who's dieted pretty much her whole life and was never really satisfied with how she looked and is tired of constantly counting and tracking and feeling like she was always starving and never able to enjoy food. That would really be my ideal client.
And what's something you've been working on professionally, whether it's personally, physically, mentally, something that you're excited about?
I have been doing a lot of mindset work recently, actually. I've been a mindset mastermind for female entrepreneurs, and that has been absolutely fantastic. I've been really challenging imposter syndrome and burnout and kind of the hustle culture. And so trying to incorporate more space in my life, recognize that I do have the abilities that I need in order to be successful. And also knowing that like my timeline is my own and not struggling with that comparison syndrome. I feel like social media and just the world we live in can really breed a lot of comparison. And so I've been doing a lot of mindset work on that for myself, and it's been really, really exciting and incredible.
And what's something that you've learned that you wish you knew sooner?
Ooh, everything's going to work out just fine. I know that sounds, very broad, but I think I had so many fears and concerns going into retirement and starting a business and even in my clinical work that I can trust myself. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I can trust my intuition and I can trust my ability to make decisions. And then I think the other biggest thing is, the small stuff, like eating the cookie today. It's not going to matter in 5 years. It's really okay. And just giving myself a lot more grace.
Now, what do you want to leave listeners with?
Ooh, that is a great question. I'd say I want to leave listeners with knowing that nutrition doesn't have to be as complicated as you might think. If you're eating a variety and you are eating enough, food can be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be stressful. And if you are feeling stressed about your nutrition, feel free to reach out to someone, because food should be the last thing that we're stressed about on a day to day. We have enough other things to be stressed about. Food shouldn't be one of them.
I love that. And how can people find you?
Instagram is probably the best way. My Instagram handle is @fueling.former.athletes. You can also reach out to me on my website, SpadaStrongNutrition.com. And I am starting to enter the TikTok world slowly but surely. Same handle as Instagram, but social media would probably be the best way to reach me.
I'm curious to see your TikToks. I think the synchronized swimming thing is going to be pretty phenomenal in there.
I have a few.
You have a good skill set for it.
I have a few synchro TikToks up right now, so
awesome.
There are a couple of them.
Excellent. Well, really appreciate your wisdom. Appreciate you being on the show. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guests as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.